I was completely surprised to find only days later that the professor had called me to his office and he had labeled across the top of my works the words blasphemous and sacrilege. He was extremely upset and threatened to dismiss me from the program, were it not for the interference of another professor who stood in on my behalf and suggested that perhaps my conclusions, though upsetting, still fit the criteria for the paper. I was spared. However, I was extraordinarily disillusioned. I felt that the university was the best place in which we could pursue openness and challenge the mainstream. I was wrong. Finding no recourse, I then approached UFO organizations. I approached, and at that time they were not known as New Age, but I approached the Love and Light centers. I approached science fiction writers. I sent documents. I sent manuscripts. And I asked them all to please take a look at what we had discovered, hoping that someone, somewhere, would be open-minded and would expose our work to others. There was a gentleman who was a science fiction author, and he wrote back simply, "It is wonderful stuff. It is the stuff of myth and legend. It is not worthy of serious examination." An organization in southern Arizona, very prominent in its time, suggested that it was also wonderful stories, the stuff of myth and legend, and not worthy of serious examination. In short, I spent nearly a year attempting to tell the story, to present the documentation of the hidden history of planet Earth. I was rebuffed. I was rejected. In fact, I was treated as some sort of a scourge. It was as if I had presented the most blasphemous and sacrilegious thing one could imagine. I was very upset. I vowed at that time with my brothers that we would continue the story. We would share it with the primitives, with the savages. I was able to travel the country. I went down to New Zealand and Australia. I worked with the Aborigines and the Maoris down there. I worked with Mexican Indians and African Zulu shamans who came to the United States. And it was interesting because the primitive world was very open to the concept that we had been deluded, that we had been deceived, because they too had grown up with the same concepts. Perhaps it is because the primitives of this world have suffered at the hands of the civilized people. The Aborigines in Australia, the Aborigines in Tasmania, the Native Americans in North America have almost been decimated by the civilized worlds who know what the truth is and who simply dismiss and destroy anyone who disagrees. I was never again going to talk to anyone other than a primitive about the star knowledge until my grandfather became ill. And as he was passing away, as he was dying, he made me promise that I would spend one full year again telling the story, telling everyone what we had discovered in our research, what we knew. I simply and honestly did not want to do it. But he elicited a promise, and in February of 1995, I began my 1 year. My grandfather has since passed away. The year, February 1 of 95 to February 1 of 96, has come and gone. I attended numerous lectures and workshops. I gave several appearances. I have delivered 48 workshops and or appearances in 52 weeks. My family and I have traveled the countryside and done nearly 20,000 miles in the year. I was prepared and was expecting to find everyone rejecting the work, writing me off as a raving lunatic. And I will tell you something interesting that occurred in the year that I was on the road. I did every UFO lecture circuit appearance I could. I did expos. I did private appearances. And I have to tell you that I was very disillusioned. It appears, and this is my opinion only, it appears that the UFO community in general is more concerned with its image, more concerned with how it looks and making a dollar than it is in getting the truth. There are a handful of men who I truly believe are trying to find the truth out. But they are being slowed down, they are being hampered by organizations that are disreputable at best. I have found myself oftentimes listed as a keynote speaker at a conference or an appearance which I have never been called for. I have written promoters and have told them I simply would not attend, and they continue to keep our name on the billing. Ladies and gentlemen, please be very careful, because it appears that the UFO community church, and this is an analogy of my own making, is more concerned with its image, more concerned with producing messiahs and gurus and saviors than it is with pursuing the truth. In the primitive societies of this planet, if an individual stands before you and declares himself the anointed one, the messiah, the savior, the guru, the primitives know to walk away from him. For he who really knows, he who is a true teacher, will never declare himself as the one. I am extremely dismayed that there are numerous individuals on the circuit today who declare themselves as the one. It is extraordinarily disheartening to those of us who are trying to tell the truth. My 1 year has come and gone, and the story that I have tried to present, I am going to try to sum up for you very quickly in the next 2 hours. We have in our research discovered that planet Earth is not in the hands of man's institutions. It is not the governments, the churches. It is not the banks. It is not the secret societies. It is not the power players behind the scenes who control the events and the destinies of the people on this planet. My answer as to who truly is in charge begins with not only my own research, but the works of, again, Mr. Sitchin, Bauvel, Mr. Hancock, and numerous others. I am sure that most of you are familiar with works that suggest that extraterrestrials have influenced our lives in the past. There are far too many references to UFOs, to dancing lights, to heavenly beings for these stories to be false. Can a primitive man have had the imagination and the technology to create the pyramids and the Sphinx? We know that even with our technology today, we cannot build the pyramids in Egypt, the gates in Mexico, Tiwanaku, Machu Picchu. We cannot replicate that very simple stone structure that these primitives are supposed to have done. Why? I am suggesting, along with numerous other authors, that extraterrestrials have interfered with man's evolution. Not only have they guided us as divinities, they have punished us, tormented us as the demons and the devils of our history. I am going to suggest to each one of you that, by definition, an angel is an extraterrestrial. Extraterrestrial means that it is not of Earth. Angels are properly in heaven. By the very same definition, God is an extraterrestrial. Now, whether one chooses to use the word divinity or extraterrestrial, I will leave it to you. But in all the holy books, in all the religious reports and studies, in all of the hieroglyphs and the cuneiforms, the legends of star beings, of divinities, of extraterrestrials who have descended to Earth, and who have not only tampered with our evolution, but who are in all actuality responsible for the experiment that is known as man. We have taken the research, the documents, the cuneiforms, the hieroglyphs, the myths, and the legends, and what we have come up is going to astound you. There are 2 star systems in our galaxy that appear to have influenced mankind's evolution and the development of our solar system for billions of years. The first and the most important, because it is the largest and the most powerful star system, is a system that in ancient documents is referred to as Orion. Today we know it as Orion. The Orion star system has a civilization that appears to be billions and billions of years old. Through the research, we have begun to piece together what the beings of the star system Orion must be like. It is possible in the research that we have made wrong estimates, that we have made wrong judgments. But it appears that the Orion star system is populated with a reptilian-type being. It appears that in the early stages, the Orion star system developed much as mankind did. There was a spark, there was a flash. Life evolved from a one-cell being to a two-cell to a multi-cell being. The difference between the evolution in the star system Orion and the solar system we call Earth is that instead of an ape in the evolutionary formula, the Orion star system uses a reptile. Take a tiny little velociraptor, the same tiny little dinosaur lizard that was the villain in the Jurassic Park movie. And if you plug this little figure into the evolutionary formula, you will end up with a humanoid that is reptilian. And it is this reptilian humanoid, in general, that populated the star system Orion. Originally, it was a male-oriented society. But in time, the queens, the females, came to power in Orion. And as cold-blooded and as ruthless as the warrior kings of Orion were, it appears that the queens were much more calculating, much more devious, and much more deadly. It appears there is a galactic truth. Never disturb the female of the species. The Orion star system has grown over the billions of years of its history into the single largest and most powerful galactic star empire in our neck of the woods. It has become responsible for what appears to be known as a star passageway, a highway, an interstate of stars that leads from the core of our galaxy to the very outer edges. It follows one of the spiraling arms, and it appears from our research that the name of the star passageway is the Pesh-Meten. Pesh-Meten can be interpreted in Egyptian hieroglyphs as ninth passageway. The Orion star system regulated and controlled the ninth passageway. Visitors coming in and out of our galaxy, traveling back and forth through the stars, were forced to use this star highway. By regulating the ninth passageway, the Orion people became an extraordinary power. The Orion queens, in their ruthlessness, became wealthy beyond their dreams. However, a few billion years later, another star system evolved. This one was populated by beings who evolved from what appears to be a wolfen or canine type of ancestor. Yes, what I am suggesting is that a wolf-man humanoid, a canine humanoid, evolved. In fact, these beings were known as the Canus. Canus is the root for canine. This star system was named after their military power. They grew in their strength and in their might. They were vicious. They were cruel. They were known as the Dak, D-A-K. The Dak Empire, the Dak Star. To this day, we refer to that star as the Dog Star. It is the star system Sirius. The star system Sirius, populated by Canus kings, not as evolved as the reptilian beings, still vicious, still cruel, and primitive by comparison, began to expand their own empire. And slowly and surely, they began to encroach on the ninth passageway. The Orion queens, disturbed and worried, went to the Dak Empire. They approached the Syrian kings, and they suggested that perhaps an alliance was in order. This alliance between a wolfen humanoid beings in Sirius, reptilian humanoid beings in Orion, created an empire that is beyond compare. Between the Orion and Sirius star systems, virtually half of the galaxy falls to their control. The Orion queens are at the throne at the top. The Sirian kings are the minions. They're faithful and loyal servants, but a power in their own right. I suggest that people take a look at constellation lore, the stories of how the constellations have been named and why they have the stories behind them, and they will find that the star system Orion, or the constellation Orion, is known as the Great Hunter. And at its feet are its two loyal and faithful dogs, Canis Major and Canis Minor. This is but one small sliver of evidence that begins to confirm the very story that we are suggesting. We find that in Babylonia, Mesopotamia, and even in ancient Egypt, that the pyramids are oriented towards the star Orion and the star Sirius. In a recent book and in recent appearances, two authors of whom I have a tremendous amount of respect, Mr. Graham Hancock and Mr. Robert Bauvel, who have co-authored a book recently, coincidentally. It's, I believe, called The Message of the Sphinx. I highly recommend it. But I will suggest that there is one tiny little flaw in their research. They have discovered in the pyramids of Egypt two large chambers. One, the larger one, is referred to as the King's Chamber and is oriented towards the star Orion. The second and smaller chamber, called the Queen's Chamber, is oriented towards the star system Sirius. The Egyptian myths and legends, the cosmology of that time period, seem to be rather confusing if one looks at Orion as the Sirius or Osiris figure, and if it looks at the star system Sirius, the small chamber, as oriented towards the male. The female. I am going to suggest that there is a very simple error in the research. The larger chamber is not the King's Chamber, it is the Queen's Chamber, oriented towards Orion, because it is a female reptilian power. The smaller chamber is actually the King's Chamber. It is oriented towards the star system Sirius, which is populated by Canis male kings. These two star systems, in an alliance, controlled most of our galaxy. At the outer edges of the ninth passageway, known as the Peshmeten, another solar system evolved. It was brand new. And this fledgling young star was known as Bod, B-A-D. This fledgling young star system only had two planets in the very beginning. In the dusts, in the stuff of creation, as the star cooled, one extraordinarily large planet formed, with one tiny little one rushing close to the sun between the large planet and the sun Bod. The little planet was known as Mu. In time, another pair of planets evolved between Mu and this large planet, which we will refer to at this time as Planet X. These two planets in time would be known as Lachmu and Lachamu. You can find this in the Babylonian creation epics. The names appear several times, but I will suggest to you that we today refer to Lachmu and Lachamu as Mars and Venus. Twin planets formed and followed not much later by another pair, two giants forming together, one which suffered tremendous chaos and a lot of disturbance, and it eventually lost some of its size, but in fact gained some rings. The two twin large planets we now refer to as Jupiter and Saturn. Just some time afterwards, yet another pair formed. These two remain twins almost to this day. We refer to them as Uranus and Neptune. The solar system bod developed at the outer edges of the Peshma 10. It fell immediately under the jurisdiction of the Sirius star system of that empire. The Syrian king at that time decided to exploit this new solar system because new planets mean new resources, it means gold, it means diamonds, it means precious metals. And so he dispatched soldiers and settlers, volunteer technicians, to come and to exploit the solar system. In the solar system, colonies were built on the large planet known as Planet X, and on some of the moons, particularly of the largest planet, which we now call Jupiter. The purpose of the colonies was again to exploit the resources, to do the mining, to strip away the precious metals and return them to the star system Sirius. Once refined, the wealth could then be passed on to the Orion Queen. And in this way, the Syrian kings were able to keep the queen happy. Settlers from numerous planets on the star system Orion and the star system Sirius, those who wanted a new life, those who wanted to flee the system. Does the story sound familiar? Because it's played itself over hundreds of times, not just on our planet, but in the stars. Beings who were disappointed or frustrated with their institutions and their systems fled the Orion and the Sirius star systems, and they fled to the solar system known as Bod. They established colonies on the Red Sands planet and the White Sands planet. They established colonies on the moons of the large planet we now call Jupiter, and also on one planet known as Planet X. Planet X resided between Mars and Jupiter. The only thing that remains there now is debris, the asteroid belt. What happened to Tiamat? What happened to this planet? Well, as the solar system began to develop, the king of Sirius found himself in great difficulty in his own empire. I do not at this point want to get into the details. We have written about it extensively in the Terra papers, and I will refer you to those papers. However, the Syrian king, living in a canine empire, vicious, cruel, and cold-blooded, was forced to flee his own star system. He fled to the colony known as Bod, and he established a small empire on the planet known as Tiamat, Planet X. He made arrangements with the Queen of Orion, immediately bypassing his own star system. The court that had betrayed him, he completely ignored, went to the Queen, struck up an agreement, and he was able to buy his life. He was able to spend time on a faraway colony in a tiny little solar system only beginning to develop, as long as he provided precious metals for the Queen. The Syrian king who replaced him was extraordinarily upset. He wanted the end of this ex-Syrian king, and he and the families were constantly at war. The Syrian king who fled to the solar system Bod managed to live his life out in relative peace. But he was granted a grandson. His own son, who died in one of the Star Wars, one of the numerous battles, his son never saw the palace that was created on Planet X, but his grandson was raised in it. This young grandson, as soon as he became aware of who he was and who he was descended from, knowing that his place was in the heavens in the Sirius star system, became very upset. He found himself deprived of the throne of a star system that was a power second only to one. Disappointed, upset, he vowed revenge. His grandfather passed away, and he found himself in control of the new solar system. During the course of his upbringing, he enrolled in several institutions, learning institutions, in which he was able to master warfare in space, in the seas, and on land. This young man became a master, an overlord of the war technologies of the Syrian people. The single highest honor that can be afforded anyone of his caliber was Zu. It is the practice in many, many ancient societies from Egypt and beyond that the king or the queen ascending to the throne would double his name. This implied great power. It is the same thing as if you were to say a big rock versus a big, big rock. This king of the solar system Bod, who was given the title Zu, took it to heart. And when he became king, he referred to himself as Zu. The palace in which he resided was known as Ambu. Now, this is a word you can look up in Egyptian hieroglyph dictionaries. I strongly recommend E.A. Wallace Budge. The word is Ambu, A-M-B-A-H-I-U. It literally means palace or gathering place. This palace was given the name of the grandfather who originally created the colony. It was called Al-Ambu. According to tradition, King Zuzu should have granted his name to the palace, replacing his grandfather's, but he refused to do so. And instead, he simply added his name at the end of the palace's name. Al-Ambu became known as Al-Ambu-Zu. In time, this young king, Zuzu, declared war against the kings of Sirius. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the beginning of a story that we all will recognize. Because what we have is a young king, a god in his own way, who is known as Zuzu or Zuz, who resided on Mount Alambuzu, Olympus. I strongly suggest that you read the Greek theogony. It is a story in which the legends of King Zeus resided on Mount Olympus, and how he declared war against the olden gods of Osiris. Osiris is recognized in Egypt as Osiris. Osiris is an Egyptian word which means the star Sirius. I am going to suggest to you that if you take a look at the theogony, you will find confirmation of this story, that once there was a king named Zeus who rebelled against the olden gods and created his own palace, his own empire, in a tiny little solar system known as Bod. And in the solar system Bod, we would later find planets known as Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, and Saturn. Ladies and gentlemen, the stories about Zeus and Hera and Mount Olympus are true. In time, however, the Syrian king, the Orion queen, combined their forces, and they descended upon the solar system and this rebel king, and they destroyed his empire. They destroyed the planet on which he resided, Planet X, known as Tiamat. You can find this in the Babylonian creation epics. You can find this in numerous books. Again, I strongly recommend Mr. Sitchin's work, Zachariah Sitchin, and the 12th Planet, the Earth Chronicles. Tiamat, Planet X, the home of Mount Olympus, was totally and completely obliterated. All that remains in this day and age is the asteroid belt. The colonies on the moons of Jupiter and on some of the other planets were completely destroyed. Many of the residents of the planets of the white sands and the planet of the red sands fled underground. They removed themselves into the caverns, into the underground structures, and they survived the destruction of the surface of their planet. Later on, some of the survivors would surface. They would attempt to rebuild their planet. They would attempt to rebuild at least a small city, leaving a monument of sorts to their civilization. What I am going to suggest to you is that the face on Mars is one of those testimonial structures. That they are going to find that this structure is billions of years old, and that it will at some point and in some fashion refer back to the legends of the great god Zeus and Mount Olympus. That civilization appears to have died away. Richard Hoagland's work and several of the others who are researching in the face on Mars, I believe, have been distracted. They have been sidetracked and are looking at the moon. It is not that the moon itself does not have anomalies and questions that must be answered, but I am suggesting that we are leaving something extraordinarily crucial in the evolution and the discovery of the truth, and that is that singular structure known as the face on Mars. I am also going to suggest that we are going to find that very, very same structure on Venus. Somewhere on that barren, hot planet, we're going to find the very, very same structure. It is, to me, a curious coincidence and a grand testimonial to the work of Mr. Hoagland and the others. They have discovered that the face on Mars is accompanied by a pyramid city. They refer to it as Cydonia. They have also discovered that the floor plan of the pyramid and the city Cydonia match almost identically a tiny village in England known as Avebury, down to the moat, the structures, and the floor plan. This goes beyond coincidence. I strongly and highly recommend any and all of the work on the face on Mars by Mr. Hoagland and other fine authors. This is a clue, and I believe will someday confirm the story of the existence of Zeus. The solar system felt the wrath of the Sirius star system and the Orion star system. They completely obliterated life, the forests, the trees, the plants, the animals, and the beings who lived on Venus, who lived on Mars, and who lived on the moons of Jupiter. The moon and planet Earth are the survivors of this devastation. I recommend The 12th Planet and the Earth Chronicles by Mr. Sitchin, in which he very, very confidently proposes the scenario that the remnants of planet Tiamat were forced inward and caught in the third orbit known as planet Earth and the moon. It is a strong book. It is a very convincing book. I highly recommend his work. I recommend, if you can, the Terra Papers, in which we add other details that we believe are missing in the 12th Planet. I do not wish to elevate myself, but suggest that our work will work hand in hand and coincide with Mr. Sitchin's work. What I have suggested in the last half hour or so is that our solar system was once thriving with ancient civilizations, ancient structures, and wisdom of the star beings. It was through revenge and the seeking of profit. It was about wealth and power that created the destruction of our solar system. I strongly suggest a book by a Mr. Van Flandern. I believe it's called Dark Matter Missing. I apologize. If you will call in the morning, we will give you the title. Dark Matter Missing Universe. My apologies to the gentleman because I should have had it with me. In which Mr. Flandern takes a very, very close look at the asteroids and comets who are flying in and out of our solar system, and he also examines with great care the geography, the geology of the planets of our solar system. It appears through his work that he can verify that there must have been an explosion, an enormous explosion of some sort in the vicinity of what is now the asteroid belt. Should such an explosion have taken place, it would be a very safe assumption to suggest that the moons, the planets, if they were facing the explosion, that they should be darkened or blackened on one side more heavily than another. In other words, to simplify it, they would have been scorched. They would have been covered with the stuff of the explosion. With great detail and an extraordinarily plausible argument, Mr. Van Flandern proves, or at least with the evidence available, strongly suggests that just this event has occurred. The moons are blackened, the planets are pockmarked and darkened on one side. In other words, our own science has shown that an explosion must have taken place in the vicinity of the asteroid belt. But there is one curious little tidbit, one tiny little clue that simply does not seem to fit. Under normal circumstances, the explosion of a planet, whether it had been from an asteroid, whether it had been from some sort of internal reaction, there would be certain traces and certain evidence. However, if this explosion occurred, as it appears to have done so, we have some evidence that suggests the existence of antimatter in the explosion. Antimatter is not going to develop from a natural explosion, whether it be an asteroid, a comet, or internal causes. It is this one tiny little factor that seems to plague Mr. Van Flandern, and I respect highly his work. I am going to suggest that the existence of antimatter in the planets of our solar system and the returning asteroids, that this very fact alone suggests that the destruction of the planet, the destruction which caused the asteroid belt, had to have been of unnatural causes. It had to have resulted from the star wars of two star systems who are incredibly advanced, possessing technology that is billions of years old. I strongly recommend Mr. Flandern's work, and again, I will give you the title in the morning if you will give us a call. At this moment, again, just very briefly, please, if you would, tomorrow, call your friends, call your neighbors, let them know that we will be doing 3 more hours tomorrow night. If you would, please, give Mr. Remlin a call. Let the Freedom Radio Network know that you are happy with what they're doing, or let them know if you're unhappy with what they're doing in the form of our program. Tomorrow, I will have my family here. I encourage you, please, if you would help us in our research, if you would be interested in learning the hidden history of planet Earth, if you would like to know more about the Terra Papers, the story of the star being who crashed, and the Second Coming conspiracy, you can reach us at home. Our phone number is area code 602-404-8050. You can call us on this number. It is also a fax number. If you want to send us a fax tonight and request some information, we can pick up our faxes in the morning. If you enjoy this kind of research, if this kind of material intrigues you at the very least, even if it upsets you, please, I can only ask that you look at it with an open mind. Please take a look at what we are trying to say. We have been deceived. We have been manipulated. We have been cheated. I am going to suggest to you, for the remainder of this evening and tomorrow, that our lives and planet Earth have not been controlled by the institutions of man. They have not been in any way controlled by our religious institutions or our economic institutions. I am going to go out on a limb. I am going to risk your wrath and the loss of my credibility and suggest to you that we have been manipulated by extraterrestrials, star beings, the divinities, gods, whatever you want to call them. We have been controlled by beings who are extraterrestrial from the very inception of the experiment known as man. In the last hour, I would like to talk about the Bible, the creation of man, and how we came to be. But for the moment, let me finish out this hour by suggesting to you that I have created a scenario in which two star systems have evolved. They have, in turn, been responsible for the creation of our own solar system. And because of a rebel star being known as Zeus, our solar system, once highly advanced, populated by an ancient civilization of which I believe the face on Mars and the other monuments that they are discovering on the moon are evidence of, our solar system, once teeming with life, was stripped bare and decimated in a Star Wars. In time, the Sirian king, responsible for the destruction of the solar system, dispatched his eldest son, a Genesis scientist, an individual who had been trained to develop atmospheres, environments, to create new plant life, new animals, to recreate atmospheres so they become breathable. The Genesis scientist, young prince, is known as Prince Ea, as you can find him in all of our ancient myths, as Prince Enki. In Mesopotamia, Babylonia, Sumeria, the legends are replete with the ancient god Ea, who descended to this planet, and he began to recreate the atmosphere. He brought in plants from his own homeworld, and he created hybrids. He took the remnants, the cells, the small organisms, and the tiny little animals who had survived the obliteration and decimation of the solar system, and he began to rework their evolution. He began to create the fishes, the plants, and the animals. The plants, in turn, gave out oxygen and took in the carbon dioxide. The healing rains came, and Prince Ea, the Genesis scientist, began to manipulate the environment. In time, this young prince was responsible for the recreation of planet Earth. Now, I'm going to digress for just a moment to give you a very, very quick linguistic breakdown, which I think may disturb some, but should be very revelatory to those with an open mind. In the most ancient of languages of mankind, in the Sumerian, the Babylonian, and even in the Egyptian, we find a very simple word, a little sound that represents creator, someone who brings life forth. This term is da or ta. The T and D are virtually interchangeable. It is a dental T, ta. The name given to the prince, the title given to the prince, was Da-Ea. Da-Ea literally meant the Genesis scientist, the creator Ea. It is this title that I suggest is the root for the names of most of the gods of mankind. Da-Ea is the root for Tao, Deus, Dios, Dios Pitar in Egypt, and on and on. Deus, Dios, Tao, comes from Da-Ea, and it is Da-Ea who created, or recreated, I should say, planet Earth. I am suggesting to you, and I'm sure that this is going to be upsetting, but the name Da-Ea, Dios, refers to a Genesis scientist, a star being who had the knowledge, who had the technology to recreate an atmosphere. Many of our scientists are working on exactly that same thing today. They are trying to work out a project in which they can create atmospheres on the moon, create atmospheres on Mars. The second, and I think which will disturb many people, the second discovery, the linguistic discovery of Prince Ea, is the root for the name Yahweh. In all of the ancient languages, the suffix "u," pronounced means of, the works of, the things of, that which is of. The works of Ea, which means the repopulating of the planet with plants and animals, the recreation of the environment, was referred to as that of Ea-u. Ea-u is the root for Yahweh. With great apologies, again, I do not wish to offend, but the linguistic source of the name Yahweh is one of the most ancient names that we have found in any of the histories of our planet, of any of the documentation, of any of the hieroglyphs and cuneiforms. It is the name Ea-u, which is the source of a Yahweh. Now, I am not going to suggest to you that there is not a grand and ultimate being in the universe.
The views expressed don't necessarily represent those of this station, its networks, advertisers, or agencies. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Please seek advice from your own qualified legal or medical professional. Thank you.
I am, however, going to suggest to you that the being responsible for the creation of our planet, responsible for the creation of the fish and the oceans and the environment, is a Genesis scientist, a star being known simply as Prince Ea. It is this individual, which we suggest in the Terra Papers, is at the root, who is at the source of all of the major religions of our planet. I do not wish to sound disrespectful, but the term God is not a title applied to the ultimate divinity. It was a working title given to the Genesis scientists, to the creators. If you would indulge me for just one more moment. If you will remember, I suggested early on that the Sirian star system was named after its military forces, after its power and might, known as the Dak, D-A-K. The Dak star, the Dog star. The K at the end of Dak is a guttural K. It is very easily, in many of the ancient societies, many of the ancient languages, it is interchangeable with the letter G. So in other words, the destructive forces, the destroyers, were known as the Dogs, D-O-G. But we find a very, very interesting pattern in all of the ancient languages, from the Egyptian hieroglyphs, the Sumerian, the Babylonian, and the Mesopotamian. And this is where we have found the powers that be, the educational experts, the researchers, the scholars, the Egyptologists, etc., and etc. This is where they have become very resistant. We are suggesting, and we have hundreds of pages to show the linguistic breakdown. We have suggested that in the ancient star languages, if you read a word from left to right, you get one meaning. If you read the word from right to left, you get the opposite meaning, the true opposite. And so I am going to suggest to you that the word Dak means destroyer, and its opposite, which would be spelled K-A-D or G-A-D, means creator. The title God was nothing more than a title given to the technicians, to the scientists whose job it was to repopulate the planet. It is not an appellation given to the divinity, to the ultimate being. And this is where we have been deceived. We have been programmed, we have been taught to accept the idea that gods are the ultimate beings, and with great apologies, they are not. They were the technicians, whether you call them extraterrestrial star beings or angels or heavenly lords or heavenly beings. They were the ones responsible for the recreation of our planet and the creating and guidance of mankind. Prince Ea was the first god. He was known, his works were known as that of Eyahu or Eyahu. He was known as Da'ea, which is the root for Deus and Dios. I almost hesitate to offer such a simplistic linguistic offering, but I suggest that there should be sufficient evidence there to be persuasive enough. Prince Ea was responsible for recreating planet Earth, taking existing surviving cells, bringing life from other planets, from other stars, into our world. What I am suggesting is that not all of the animals on our planet are indigenous, purely indigenous to our planet. I'm suggesting that if you take a look at something like the platypus, the ostrich, and other creatures which seem extraordinarily strange, that they too have been tampered with, and that their ancestry lies far, far away in the stars of Sirius and Orion and numerous other planets. And then in the next hour, I'm going to talk to you about another creature that was evolved on this planet, one who also has his roots in the heavens, who has his roots in the star system Sirius and the star system Orion. Prince Ea was to find a creature known as an Appa, a dark, hairy beast, strong of back, possessed of some intelligence, enough so that he could obey a command. And he took the Appa, and he began to mix the DNA of star beings into its evolution. This Appa would give birth to a creature that would later be known as a Dhamma. A Dhamma is the tampered with, evolved through DNA manipulation, through the genetic alteration of the Appa. The Adhamas, as I'm sure you can anticipate, our ancestors. While I believe the story of evolution, the theory of evolution by Mr. Darwin is accurate for the most part, I will suggest to you that mankind could not possibly have evolved under normal circumstances without having the evolution of the ape tampered with. Mankind is the result of the fingerprints of the gods. He is the result of divinities, extraterrestrials, of star beings. The myths and the legends of the Aborigines and the Anasazi, the Hopi, the Apache, and the native tribes of Native America are true. The stories in most of our religions about heavenly beings coming down and teaching mankind, tampering with, and creating us in their image are true. I suggest that if you look in religious sources, legends, myths, cosmologies, even some of the tiniest little fairy tales, that they all have a small measure of truth. And for those of you who are out there who are believers in the unicorn, the centaur, the minotaur, and all those fabulous beasts, the phoenix and the griffin, I'm going to suggest to you that Prince Ea, the creator of this planet, the one who tampered with the DNA, also created those beings. Ladies and gentlemen, the unicorn is real. The centaur is real. I believe in the unicorn and its fabulous powers. Thank you very much again, Rod. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the time. I hope that you have been able to at least have a few eye-opening moments. That I hope some of it makes sense. I hope if it disturbs any, that one understands, as I said at the very beginning of the program, that you not accept what I am saying. I am providing you with 30 years' worth of effort and research. My family thanks you, and if you would, please let Rod know if this is the kind of programming that you would like to hear. My thank yous to the Freedom Radio Network and Rod Rumlin and Mr. Hinkson. I don't want to be remiss in recalling him. And for my sister Ivy, who got me started with the network, thank you very, very much to all of you. At the end of the last segment, I was suggesting that there was an individual, a star being who is known as Ea or Enki. Now, this is an individual that is very easily found in the earliest of creation myths, and you will see him numerous times in several works by several authors I highly recommend. Prince Ea, I am suggesting, was responsible for the recreation of planet Earth. During his experimentation and attempting to find hybrid plants that could survive and finding hybrid animals that could endure the harsh environment as well as an extraordinarily poisonous atmosphere. It is at this time that I need to point out that we, planet Earth, has an atmosphere that is approximately 80% nitrogen. Now, this is an inert gas. It is poisonous. Most star beings are unable to withstand it for any great lengths of time. And so it was one of Prince Aya's primary tasks to find a beast that was strong, that was capable and intelligent enough to obey a command, that could resist the environment and the harsh atmosphere, and that would serve his masters, his gods and dogs, loyally. Prince Aya found the Appa beast and began to tamper with and manipulate the DNA. He was successful. Now, I am abbreviating the story, but I'm going to suggest that in the Terra Papers, the person responsible, the actual hands-on creation of the beast known as Adama, and who would later be known as man, was Prince Aya's younger sister, who was in fact known as Nin-Hersag. I am suggesting to you that the original prototype, the first beast known as man, was actually created by a woman. I am Hopi and very proud. We call ourselves Hopitu. As I said at the very beginning of this evening's program, the Hopi believe that the creator of man was a woman. And our research bears this out. Again, allow me to recommend The 12th Planet by Zecharia Sitchin, in which he outlines the very, very same thing in his works, and Graham Hancock and others. The prototype man was created by a female, but the responsibility for the entire project fell to Aya. The beast was extraordinarily successful in his labors. Originally, the beast was often referred to as Lulu. Lulu meant one who has to be watched over constantly. There was an unpredictability factor in the Appa beast. Though it was loyal, though it was faithful, it was still a beast. There were moments in which there were outbursts of violence and passion. The beast had to be watched over constantly. It was called Lulu, the slave. I am proposing to you that the beast called man was originally created to serve the gods, to serve the star beings faithfully and loyally, in extracting the precious metals from the bowels of earth, in working the fields, and in creating a new life form which provided a profit. In other words, this was a business. The commands that were issued to the beast were very simple. You will obey, you will follow the word of the gods. The beast, with its minimal intelligence, understood minimally some of the concepts presented to him. Yes, beast, you are created in our image. You have our DNA. We have manipulated you genetically, and and the beast, not knowing any better, simply remembered, we are created in the image of the gods. That opening statement in the Bible, which perplexes so many scholars, is absolutely accurate. We were created in their image. In time, Prince Aya, having recreated the planet and controlling and creating a paradise, in time he was replaced. His father was very concerned because Prince Aya spent too much time in the agricultural biological center he had created. It was a wonderful garden. New plants, new beasts, new birds, new fishes. It was an extraordinary experiment in the creating of hybrids. But Prince Aya, being a scientist and pursuing with passion this experiment called life, was spending too much time in the garden. He was ignoring the minds and the generation of a